Hello, I'm Antonio, and in today's edition of DM's Dungeon, we're going to talk about what it'd be like to have a Legend of Zelda tabletop RPG. The Legend of Zelda is a property that a lot of tabletop RPG fans would love to see successfully translated to the tabletop RPG realm. It's something that is a huge touchstone for a lot of people that are playing tabletop role-playing games right now, just because of the time it developed and the age we're all at now. And that touchstone makes it actually a great property for a tabletop. You know, you're going to have a lot of things that are just kind of inherently known to the players, so you're not going to have as much of the world to set up and so forth, which I think is one of the draws of these tabletop RPGs that are in existing properties, you know, like Star Wars is, there is so much that's already known that you don't have to do either world building wise on your own as a DM or GM or exposition-wise explaining it to your characters. Now, there's a number of reasons why a Legend of Zelda pen and paper RPG would work really well. For one, you have a similar setting to Dungeons and Dragons, which is probably the world's most popular RPG, tabletop RPG anyway, in that you have magic, you're going in with a sword and a shield and bows and arrows, you're going to clear a dungeon and all that sort of stuff, you know, save the world, save the princess, clear the curse from the gods, you know, collect these artifacts passed down from on high. All that stuff fits really well into that high fantasy epic sort of tale that Dungeons & Dragons tends to tell in their campaigns. Next, you have similar progression hooks. You are gaining health, gaining new attacks or abilities, and gaining new items, often magical, as the game goes on to help make your character more powerful. Now, in D&D, you know, you have stuff like the amount of damage you do tends to go up, whether it's because of a spell or because you're a fighter and you get to do more attacks and so forth. That isn't usually the case with Zelda, but still, you know, getting to go to Ocarina of Time, the Biggoron sword or something like that does kind of increase your damage output later in the game. So again, there's a lot of similarities between the progression hooks of Zelda and the type of progression hooks we're used to seeing in a standard epic fantasy tabletop RPG. Then you have that great appeal that I was talking about due to the fact that The Legend of Zelda is a cultural touchstone for most of us in the pen and paper RPG community. It's something we cut our teeth playing. You know, we learned video games and what they can be on games like A Link to the Past, Link's Awakening, Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, Wind Waker. And these are worlds that players have already become committed to and, you know, interested in some way. So it's kind of a shortcut to get your players intrigued in that way, and that's going to keep interest high, I think, leading up to the game. And going back to the similar progression hooks, you have the gear acquisition. Getting magical items often is a big part of Dungeons and Dragons. I keep using D&D, that's because, as I said before, that seems to match up the best. But, you know, you're getting, whether it's a +1 sword or a lance that can be called back at will, or what have you, you know, this idea of getting magical items, maybe even magical arrows, again, like in Zelda, is something that you will often find in D&D to help power the character up. So those are all reasons why the idea of mixing The Legend of Zelda and a pen and paper would seem like it would work. Now, I'm not saying that it doesn't, but there are a number of challenges to think about when coming up with a way to play Zelda in pen and paper. And that comes down to the feel of it. You know, of course you can put a game in the setting of Hyrule. You can have Zelda as a character. You can have the party trying to stop Ganondorf. But there are a few things that are tough to translate. One is health. Health is done very differently in Zelda. than it is in something like Dungeons and Dragons. Now, I have seen a system that essentially deals in fours for your health. One HP is essentially a quarter of a heart. That's one way to do it, but as you, especially at the beginning, it's hard to make combat that is going to be nicely balanced if you only have, let's say, a few hit points, and as you level up, let's say in D&D, here's an example, you have 100 hit points, right? You can very easily say, each hit will take off about 7%, of your hit points, which means you get, however many they get, it takes over 10 hits, right? It takes like 12 or whatever hits to get the character down. If you're only dealing with like 15 HP, it's a little more difficult to manage how much you want the enemy to take out of your character's health each time they connect, So that makes it tricky. Also, talking about combat and tricky, Legend of Zelda is usually a solo experience, not a party experience. This can definitely come into play when you're dealing with enemies, the way enemies and enemy encounters are designed in the video games. It's that, oh, there's a bunch of bats, quick, take out your slingshot, and peg them real quick or something like that. Those moments of tension, because you have to do something fast, go way down when it's, oh, there's 3 bats and there's 3 of us, we each pull out a bow, take a deep breath, take a moment to aim, you don't feel that same rush. And sometimes just adding the numbers up doesn't work. Sorry, adding the numbers up was a weird way to put that. Upping the numbers of enemies is a weird way a natural way sometimes to help make the encounter fit for a bigger party. A great example of that is, or metaphor for that is baking, right? If you're making a huge batch of something, sometimes you have to re-examine the recipe. You can't just upscale everything the same as in cooking and stuff like that, right? Now, lastly, Legend of Zelda, well, at least in the issues that I see, things that are tough to deal with. Legend of Zelda games are very linear. You have the Forest Temple, which leads to the Fire Temple, so on and so forth. It can be, unless you're very open with your players at the beginning of the campaign saying, hey, it's going to be pretty linear, is everyone okay with that? It could rub some players the wrong way. And trying to make it truly open world is going to be very tough. I mean, just look at going to, let's say, try Wind Waker, right? That was a humongous world. And let's say right after you got the boat, you tried going to a different island. You have to have all of these islands, if you're playing Wind Waker on pen and paper, made up. You have to have the map totally made up if it's not linear, right? If you can say, hey, so you pretty much have to go to the Forest Temple next. Well, I want to go to, the volcano and Mount Doom or whatever it's called in that one. I can't remember. Death Mountain. Then you often have to write something, oh, the pathway is blocked. Some rocks came flying out of the volcano and they're blocking paths. Some men are working on it, but it's gonna take a while. Maybe you should go check out that Forest Temple first. Unless you do stuff like that, which sometimes feels very unnatural or often can make it feel even more like railroading than just say, hey, and then now you're transported to the entrance to the Forest Temple. It's a tough balance. And getting things to a place where your players can explore the open world in a Hyrule setting would just take a ton of work from the DM. Now, the problems that aren't just potential issues that I see, but things that I think are issues that would stop Zelda RPG from being successful. One is just the fighting's not going to feel right. Zelda is a reaction dexterity-based video game. You are watching the swing, oh, the guy's coming from an overhead swing, so I know I gotta hit A and go to the left to roll while I'm holding Z to keep the Z targeting up, and then I press forward A to get the overhead slice down, that can get through his shield and all that. If it's just, they roll, they miss. You roll, you hit, it's not going to feel as dynamic and as exciting as combat in the game feels. And that is a hugely important part of why The Legend of Zelda works. That's why Ocarina of Time was heralded as much as it was. It's not just that the world looks good, it's not just that the story they came up with was good, it's that the combat felt right. It felt smooth. It felt like you were... It was immersive. That's all I gotta say. It was very immersive. Rolling the die in these kind of situations, especially when you're used to thinking about the video game in these situations, is not very immersive. Now, you can have potentially... I've seen a system that tries to fix this with things like reaction rules, you know, but that slows combat down. Let's say you've got a party of 5, which isn't that unheard of in pen and paper RPGs, and on every attack, the defender is rolling a reaction, opposed to just having a straight AC. That's going to really slow stuff down, even though it's going to feel at least like maybe putting some more points in dexterity, let's say, is going to be more beneficial, and you're going to feel like you're playing an acrobatic character more. And lastly, there's just again, with combat, the difference between skill and luck. In The Legend of Zelda, you know, you got better at using the arrows. You know, there was no crosshair, and you got to know how that little arc went over the bow, you know, and you were adjusting for distance, and it felt good to master those things and to, like, just, you know, I was just no scope, you know, a bat or something from across the room. When you're just rolling a die and it's like, hey, 20, not that it doesn't feel good, it's not the same feeling. And the problem is when people have already experienced the video game, that's what they're going to be comparing it to, that's what they're going to be expecting, that's what's going to be coming through their mind. And when it's so different and falls so short of the feeling that they get of when they're playing the game, and it's that feeling that made them excited about joining this campaign in the first place, it's going to be really disappointing, and I think you're going to have a lot of problems with PCs dropping out after a few sessions. Alright, well, that was why I think Zelda RPG would be enticing, but probably not work. What do you think? Do you think it would be great? Are there any Legend of Zelda homebrews on the internet that you found? If so, please give me a link in the description below, and let me know what other Nintendo or video game IPs you would like to see as a tabletop RPG. I know they have a Pokemon tabletop RPG. Maybe we could see, you know, Mario or Metroid or Kirby down the road. Let me know what you guys would like to see, and as always, thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time in the dungeon.